Hi everyone, it's Tonya Gibbs with Psycho Mom Scrapbooks and More, and today I'd like to bring you a process video of me making this layout of my husband and I. We just recently had this photo taken when we were in the mountains by my daughter. So I've decided to use the Garment District paper from Marion Smith Designs, and I selected it because of the brown and the green tones as well as the mixed media style that it has. So I selected a cardstock of neutral tones that match the paper, and this is basil cardstock, and I'm taking my Martha Stewart Cathedral punch around the corner punch, and I'm going to punch out this daisy or this doily type edge. I love how delicate and feminine this looks, and then to accent it even more, I'm going to end up doing some distressing and things like that on it later. I know these punches can be a bit tricky. You have to make sure your paper is cut exactly perfect for that around the edge. So it takes some math. I was going to do it around the outer one too, but then decided against it. I had this idea of doing this impressionistic type background since we were in the mountains and there were some things in bloom. I thought it would be nice to kind of bring those blooms kind of like a bokeh light in the background. So I'm using my Lindy Stamp Gang in Idlewise Moss and my Tattered Angels Tutti Frutti and splattering it all around. And then I also use the Lindy Stamp Gang Starbush spray that is Ponderosa Pine Olives. And then I'm taking my hand and just splattering them down. The pink was just a little too pink, so I decided to tone it down with the dried hydrangea from Tattered Angels, and it just kind of adds a blue layer. Now this next step didn't get recorded. I used a stencil, and it was a Prima stencil, and I went around the edges, just kind of, I knew I was going to put pictures in the center, so I didn't bother with the center, but just around the edges I put some, you know, little pieces here and there with some modeling paste. Now I'm taking some scrap hymnal pages that were left over from my Ustream. They were laying on my desk, so I'm just scattering them around as well. I'm using my finger, and I'm, you know, putting them down with Liquitex matte medium. And notice that I'm not adhering them all the way down. I do want to see some of that lifting up so that it kind of gives the paper a little bit of a texture. So you really want this to be good and dry before you start the next step. I hit it with my heat tool, but I put it to the side to let it cure. I'm going to take some antique linen distress ink and just distress up the edges of this center piece that we cut. If you don't end up punching it perfectly or it gets ripped in the punch, don't worry about it, because when you do this step you're going to kind of tear it a little bit. Roll it up with your fingers. This is going to give it a little bit of texture and character. So I just don't really fuss over whether or not it's perfect. I think that sometimes when it's torn, it just has a little more character to it. Then I'm going to now take a stamp from Stampendous. This is a script stamp that I've had forever, and this is the Jumbo Archival ink pad in the sepia color, and I'm just stamping that all over that cardstock. I decided the edges needed to be a little darker, so I took a Studio G gold ink pad that was laying on my desk and just went right over the edges of that, and that worked out fine. The grungier the better with this technique, I think. So now I'm going to take some Liquitex, and this is the Gesso, and I'm going to take a popsicle stick and just kind of rub that around. You could use a credit card or anything you have. I didn't want it to be perfect, so I didn't want to use a brush. I wanted lines of paint, you know, just to add to that depth. Then I took a baby wipe and kind of worked it into the fabrics of the paper a little bit. Now my layout is drying, so I took some more of that gesso and just went right over the top of all of this just to tone it all down just a little bit and send it more towards the background. So once that gesso is good and dry, I noticed that the center piece, when I put it on there, it was still just a little bit too much of a contrast. I wanted the background to still be a little more distressed, so I grabbed my Prima tool and started rolling the edges of the paper and distressing it up, and you know, really making it look a little more tattered so the edges kind of fit what's going on with the background. I I love the effect this technique gives, and you know, I just hit it one more time with the heat tool. Then what you did not see in camera was that I sprayed the layout with Moonshadow Mist from Lindy Stamp Gang and Gossamer Gold, and then I've also put some on my desk, and using a baby wipe as my applicator tool, I'm sponging it around the edges just to distress it even more. I love that this color of the Gossamer Gold just kind of adds that same caramel tone to the background as my paper, and it helped everything to just kind of blend together a little better. Then I took my Spellbinders Grand Caliber die and I cut the paper down, the Garment District paper down to that bracket square. After I laid it down, I decided it needed a few more little pieces of stamping, so I grabbed my script stamp from Stampendous and my sepia ink, and I'm just adding that right over the top of that background, giving it just a little more depth. So now I have the Zutter corrugated board that's 7x7, and I'm just going to tear off that top sheet to expose some of the corrugation on there. And you know, this is going to add my touch of masculine to this layout. Everything, all the elements that I've used so far kind of have a feminine look to them. And once I get all of that ripped off, I'm going to use my We Are Memory Keepers corner chomper in a 1/2 inch and chomp the edges, and then go ahead and add some gesso, dry brush some gesso right over the top of that corrugated board. That just gives it a little more depth, and I'm going to mount it in the diamond shape because I think it just adds a little more interest to it instead of just layers of all the same size. Notice I'm avoiding the outer edges of my papers whenever I glue them down. I did this so that if I want to add some layers in between, I can certainly tuck some things in underneath. Plus it helps for those edges to lift. Now I'm going to take my Lindy Stamp Gang in the Moonshadow Mist Gossamer Gold, and using a baby wipe I'm going to sponge that around the edges and just kind of help to bring that edge in where it's not so clean like the other edges on the other papers. And again, I'm just going to glue right there in the center so that I have room for tucking if I want to, and I can also kind of fold up the edges of everything else. Now on to my flower spray. I took the Tim Holtz decorative strip, that's the Tattered Florals, and this is the one that's on the long thin strip. It has several flower shapes on it and different sizes, and it also has leaves and daisies and roses and things. So I'm using the rose shape, and I'm spraying a little bit of the Tutti Frutti on there, as well as some of the Glory of the Seas Gold from Lindy Stamp Gang. And the two colors together will kind of help to, the Tutti Frutti from Tattered Angels is a really bright pink, so the gold kind of helps to tone it down and give this more of a poppy color. So I'm making sure I'm just using my fingers to rub it into the residual mist on my mat and just make sure I'm picking it up on both sides, so both sides of the poppy are covered completely. The way I'm going to adhere these, you will see both sides of the flower. And then I'm going to set those aside and let them dry really well before I begin the next process. I also ended up cupping these up. When Marion gets her new tool out on the market, this is going to be making this job so much easier. The paper that I used for the poppies, I want to talk about that a little bit first. I used a drawing paper that has a vellum type texture to it, but it is paper. It's a cheap paper that you can get at any office supply and art supply place, but I like it because it's really thin, but it's also very durable. And whenever you hit it with the heat gun, it kind of singes the edges a little bit, just giving the flowers a little more of a realistic look. I'm arranging them down in a diagonal across the bottom of my photograph. I want them clustered up kind of tight. I'm leaving some holes and gaps in between because I want to add leaves later. And of course that's me and my husband there in the mountains. Now for my side of the photo, I wanted to add the dress form that I cut out of the original paper background right there on the corner, and I began to glue down all of my poppies. You know, again, making sure that I'm leaving a few spaces here and there for leaves and things like that. Then I realized I didn't glue down my photograph, so I'm adding some matte medium to the back of my photograph evenly around the back end and just gluing that into place. So again, I really like the way these poppies look. You need to look for that paper. It's the best way to make flowers. When Marion gets her tool out, it's the Blooming Impressions tool. You can easily take these poppies, and instead of using a stylus and going over every single leaf, her new bloom tool, you can just do the whole poppy at one time, which is super cool. So it's going to make things a lot easier. It should hit the shelves soon. You know, stay tuned to her website and make sure you ask your local retailers to order it for you. So again, there's my flower spray. I got them all in order, and then I've decided it needed to be softened up more towards the top, so I added this die I just got from Memory Box. I got it for Christmas. It's called a corner bow. It's very dainty, very fragile, but I love how that little bit of spiral just gave a little bit of a softer edge and just kind of added a little bit of elegance to this layout. I minced all of the grunge. So now I'm taking some of Marion's junk gems. This is the butterfly, and I'm bending its wings. They're made of very thin metal, so you can bend them and move them around, and I just applied a little bit of gesso to those as well. And I'm going to glue that down. I'm going to end up putting it here in this corner, but I'm going to move it from side to side a couple of times until I decide where to put it. And I'm going through my junk gems again. I found this flower, and I really like the way it looks, but I felt like half of it was lost because I was tucking it in. So I went ahead and added the gesso to the metal, and then now I'm going to cut it in half. And I just used some simple scissors that are on my desk. The metal is really thin and you can cut through it pretty easily. I'm still not sure where I want to put it, so I'm going to tuck it in several places before I end up deciding that it's going to go below that cluster of flowers. And again, all of these metal pieces are available on Marion's Junk and Gems line. The butterfly was released this season, so it should be hitting the store soon. Now I've decided for my husband's side, where I added the dress form on my side, I wanted something on his side to balance it out. So I went back to Marion's collections and found this this hot air balloon from the Nirvana collection, and I'm just going to glue it there in the negative space right on top of the photograph. Now I've picked up the other, piece of that metal and put it down, and then I also have this other piece of spiral that I want to add to the bottom of these flowers. And I think this particular flourish actually was die cut from an MFT die, and I just cut a little sprig of it off and added it to it. And I love the way these little spirals just add that little hint of whimsy and elegance to this layout. So now I'm going to take some stickles and add the centers to my poppies. It's late at night, so my lighting in my room is starting to get kind of dark, but what I wanted to do is add the stickles now, so that it would have time to dry overnight before I had to fidget with everything else. If you do decide to take the route of the stickles in the center, I highly recommend it being the very last thing you do on the layout. I do love the touch of the stickles on the poppies. It does kind of add a little bit of a glitter, but it was kind of a dull glitter, and it makes my poppies look a little more realistic. So now I've decided that it needed a little something in these little triangled edges up at the top and at the bottom to kind of anchor everything down, and I needed a title. So I went back to Marion Smith's papers and got the Nirvana collection out and found these titles. The one at the top says Heart This, and at the bottom it says Reasons to Smile. And I didn't want the plural of reasons, so I ended up taking a Sharpie and just coloring over the S, reasons, so that it reads now Heart This, Reason to Smile. And now I'm taking the leaves that were from the same die as the flowers, and I'm coloring them up with my Lindy Stamp Gang. In the Ponderosa Pine Olive is the darker color, and then the Idlewise Moss Green is the light color, and then I just went over it with the Tattered Angels chalkboard in grass. And using 3 colors like this gives my leaves some contrast and gives them a little depth. And I'm just patting this ink down into there and then making sure that it's covered on both sides. The residual ink that's left on my desk, I took a piece of the paper that hasn't been die cut yet to mop it up. This helps me to not waste the ink, and the next time I go to die cut this particular strip with some leaves, I have the color already on the paper and it's good and dry. Once these leaves are dry, I'm going to take them aside and just wad them up and let them dry naturally, and then whenever I open them up they will have some texture to them. Again, Marion's tool is going to make that really nice. Now I'm taking my Wink of Stella pen and coloring in the heart, and I'm going to take all of those leaves that I've made off to the side, and I'm going to start tucking them in around my poppies, lifting up the petals and stuffing them in between so that my spray has a little bit of depth to it. And also these leaves help to ground the flowers down. You do want to make sure your leaves are going in a natural flow around the flower so that nothing looks like it's just been placed there. So it takes some time, and again, you want to make sure if you've already stickled your flowers at this point that they are really dry before you begin, because lifting these petals up will cause that stickles to to smear. I'm also making sure I tuck some leaves in under a couple of the layers down at the bottom. I think that kind of helps to build out this spray a little bit better and give some depth under each of the individual layers. Some of these leaves needed to be trimmed down to a smaller size than what was offered on the die. One thing I really like about this die is that it has multiple sizes of leaves on it, so it is quite a good investment, especially when you invest in Marion's tool for the bloom tool, because giving dimension to these flowers is going to be so easy with that tool. And you'll be able to make lots of flower varieties. So then after I've gotten all my leaves down, I take a final look at this layout, and I decided to use some of the little pieces that I had fussy cut from the paper off to the side there on the edges. And one thing you're not going to see in video, I think I turned it off before I added it. Oh, right now I'm adding pearls to the center of my butterfly. But one thing that you're not going to see in video is I went back and added a couple of things like wooden birds from Studio Calico and a little heart on top of the Heart This. So you have a little wooden heart there. And I just added a little pearl to the center of that bow that's at the top. Just to kind of, give it a little bit of something feminine. Here are some close-ups of the background, so you can really see the texture and the color that's in the background and the hymnal page. And then I'm going to give you a nice look at the top as well, and you can really see the bow just adds, or the pearl just adds a little bit of something to the bow. And there's the wooden heart there on the right hand side. I absolutely love working with this collection. All of Marion's collections really work well together. You can piece and part them together to make anything. That's one thing I really like about them. They're so versatile. So thank you guys for watching, and thank you so much for this opportunity to share with you this process video. For additional details and for more detailed photos, you can check out my blog at marionsmithdesigns.blogspot.com and search for the January 14th, 2014 post. Thanks again for watching.